So we're back to talk about more Day of Rebirth mini set cards, and I think today's a little better than yesterday. There's some cards I could actually see myself playing in real Hearthstone decks, including this one right here behind me as we kick it off with some Shaman cards. This is Fire Breath, a new 3-mana fire spell that deals 4 damage that can go face or hit minions. Also gives your elementals +1/+1, which I think this is a pretty nice kind of 2-in-1 on this card. This could just be a great little finisher where, you know, you've got 2 or 3 elementals on board, you're just looking for 7 extra damage or whatever, and, you know, this pops 4 to face and gives you that nice board buff, which we've seen in some of these fire elemental shaman packages in particular that we got in the main Unguro set. There's all these little cinder guys that are getting left behind on board, where's the sizzling cinder here? So we can just pull it up and show you guys. You know, these kind of just like tend to swarm in that deck. There's a variety of ways to summon multiples of these. Some kind of just get stuck or left behind, or the opponent doesn't really want to kill them. And you just get this kind of like chip damage, this inevitable damage just stacking up turn after turn after turn. So, you know, a couple of these left behind on board. Fire Breath, an opponent that's already been chipped down a bunch after all those little pings and stuff, and I could see this being a nice lethal push. It's also cheap enough that like 2 of these is possible. Go into a board on turn 6, slam 8 to face, and give yourself a nice, you know, little savage roar in the process. On top of that, it's not hard to give these spell damage with the 3-drop Shaman card that draws you a fire spell and gives you spell damage on it, the Volcanic Thrasher here, this guy. So this could actually also just be like kind of a fireball, basically, in many instances. There is also that other Lava Flow card in Shaman that's really good at going face as well in this kind of package. So you start seeing all of this come together a little bit, this elemental fire package, and I think this is actually a big addition to that deck, and I think this is already kind of a competitive package that people sleep on a little bit. I could see, don't forget Brahma's in the mix too, you know, kind of, by the way, Fire Breath is kind of like a Brahma that just goes face if you look at it closely. A little different interactions with the cinders and stuff, but ultimately, I like this. I think this is another notch for that deck up, and I think that deck's pretty close to being good. I could actually see this coming together into a competitive list. This just does a lot, basically, for only 3 mana and has that lethality we like in so many cards, so I do think Fire Breath is actually pretty strong. Next up here is the Chill Spine Stegodon. We're going from fire to ice for this 4-mana 3/4 elemental beast with Battle Cry. Deal 2 damage to 2 random enemy minions, but then also Kindred and freeze them. So this could be, you know, a little bit of a board clear if the board shape is right, or if perhaps you get lucky. Maybe a way to like finish off some stuff that your Sizzling Cinders have just traded into, for instance. I think that's a possibility, but it also has some kind of scalability, I guess you'd say, where even if there are really big threats later in a game, you could use this just to lock them down. If your opponent has 2 big 8/8s on board, you just hit your Chill Spine Stegodon to freeze them out, and hopefully, you know, you're just amassing a board of pressure, because keep in mind, this is an elemental. It's like, you know, sort of thing, like they can't take trades. Maybe that sticks into a Fire Breath. This gets to hit face for 4 on the following turn, sort of thing. So I do think this is a nice little swingy card, and of course the Kindred here for an elemental deck is not going to be particularly difficult to hit. If you're leaning into a lot of elementals, then that's nice. You know, it's not the most aggressive stat line. It is a little bit reactive, so if the deck is a bit more aggressively minded as opposed to kind of mid-rangey minded, that could be something that holds us down in a purely aggro elemental world. But I also think this is a consideration even perhaps in like a Quest Shaman package as well. That can run beasts, can certainly run a lot of elementals. Many of the Shaman cards are elementals in that deck. So this might hit consistently enough where this is a good way to get a beast into your quest pool while still pulling off some nice like Kindred board swings, basically, where you're freezing them out and then, you know, playing your quest into that. So it's safe to have a turn to like play your quest or whatever, or just develop some crazy stuff that's already been buffed by your quest, or time to play a Shudder block or whatever it is. So yeah, I think this card's actually pretty solid as well. It doesn't jump out to me as absolutely crazy. I could see it kind of getting left behind for faster sorts of things, but I do think it is at least competitive and has a few different angles there that you like, given the multi-tag and the kind of late game aspect that it's still useful past turn 4, which some cards lack. Next up here is the Tor Totem, It is a 2-mana 0/4 totem, which I love seeing totems always. This one reads, at the end of your turn, get a random minion with multiple minion types. Now, again, remind you, get means added to hand. This has been used for a few expansions now, but I know still confuses some folks. That's not get on board, get in hand. So this is a value generator that is going to presumably help you finish your quest in a quest shaman deck, while also playing a totem, which is one of the sometimes harder minion types to get going for those menagerie style builds. You know, you don't have to necessarily play a totem, but it's just a little tick there on the quest sometimes. So the question is, like, is this worth it? And I don't actually think so. I think quest shaman decks are going to have to be way higher tempo if they want to compete. I think, you know, playing a 0/4 on turn 2 is super low tempo. And then the cards you're getting are just, you know, it's value in hand, but it's random stuff. It's random value. Rarely are they going to align with your game plan super well. It's just kind of a bunch of random junk. And like, yeah, the multiple minion types, sure, those help you again with your quest in the future, but you're already going to be running a lot of those if you're relying on your quest deck. Like, the odds of them offering some combination that's like perfectly, you know, suited to the game state you're in is so unlikely. You're just going to have all that stuff anyway. You're going to be getting there regardless. So I think this one's unfortunately just a bit too slow. It's just value for value's sake, and like quest decks are going to be way more refined, much tighter than needing something like this. And like, you know, value snowballs aren't really the sort of things that win Hearthstone games these days, because there's just so much value anyway. This is not out competing all the other million various value generators probably that exist in Shaman and certainly exist otherwise. So despite this card very clearly being designed for a pretty specific niche, I just don't really see the fit. And any like future totem decks or whatever too, like, does this really help you in a future totem deck? No, you'd probably rather have totems that are contributing to a totem game plan or have some way that impacts the board more immediately. So don't even see a totem out for this in the future either. So I think this card kind of just gets left behind and left out. So moving on over to Priest here, we have the Ritual of Life. This is a new 2-mana holy spell, which could be useful for a quest. Priest, of course, as a pretty low-cost holy card that is still going to give you a little bit of tempo with this effect, because it reads, discover a 3-cost minion. So you are going to get to keep that in hand, but you also get to summon a 2/2 copy of it. So you get a little bit of board right away, and you get a thing in hand, which, you know, not often will the thing in hand be super useful, but, you know, sometimes you get a card you care about. I was looking at like the Priest 3-drop pool in particular, you know, getting like a Chillin' Vol'jin or whatever would be a really good card to get in hand. Maybe not as good of one on board, but would be kind of an insane card to get in hand. But, you know, maybe a Careless Crafter's a good card to get in hand, because, you know, it's like, okay, I just get a nice death route, all these bandages. Maybe not super advantageous for me, but, you know, might come in to play at some point. Then there's other just good stuff like, you know, Cure, Light Beyond. Like, okay, maybe I can use this Spell Burst to chain. That's like a pretty good 2-drop, you know. Some of the Battle Cries are less useful, but like, okay, Void Ray, actually kind of insane. I don't know if you can get this if you're not already running Protoss cards, but if you are, that might be nuts. Twilight Mender would be a crazy hit for a Quest Priest potentially, because you're getting like a super cheap way to run this, and you're filling your curve really nicely, and you're generating more Holy and Shadow spells for your Quest Priest package. So basically, good for the quest up front. Good for curve always, because you know you're getting a 2 into a 3. You can just kind of take the best 3, so it's like an instant, easy curve fill. And I think there's like some nice upside as well, where, you know, basically occasionally you'll hit some really good 3-drop that's actually great because it's only 2, and that helps you down the road. So I actually think this card's pretty solid. Like, it just does a lot of little things, fixes early curve problems really easily, flexible holy card for a quest deck, but could maybe even be played outside of that as well. And ultimately, yeah, I think this looks pretty good. It's actually rather efficient for a Priest card. All right, next up here is the Behemoth Mask, another one of our mask cards referencing the old Colossal for Priest here. This is 7 mana, set a minion stats to 8/10, and give it lifesteal, then force a random enemy minion to attack it. So big time buff, like that's, you know, potentially a lot of extra stats. You buff a 1/1 or whatever, you're getting an extra 7/9 for 7. Perhaps more importantly, you're clearing something from your opponent's board because you're forcing an enemy minion to attack in. It's pretty much always going to survive that attack as an 8/10, you know, starships notwithstanding, I guess, but most of the time you clear a 3/3 or whatever and be left behind. So that's an instant 8 heal, which that 8 heal actually, that's really nice. Sometimes you're just really desperate for a little bit of life, and this is kind of that nice 2-for-1 heal and deal with a problem on board. But beyond that, you know, if it's a minion that's already able to attack, say something that was left behind on board from a previous turn, doesn't always happen, particularly in Priest, but possible. Or if it's like Rush, for instance, you can actually still attack again, right? Like, you still have your normal attack, so you can actually heal 16 in a given turn and maybe deal with a couple problems on board. Or if it's a minion left behind, you know, still just run 8 to face. Actually, could be a big push while you're healing for 16. Could totally kind of flip the pressure on the game where you were on the back foot, but now suddenly the opponent's on the back foot because you just healed a chill 16. So this is this kind of interesting threat that anytime something sticks, or if you're able to pair a really cheap minion with it, it becomes this really nice stabilizing tool. I was thinking about, you know, Rush minions in particular, like Catch of the Day is kind of interesting as a 1-cost card. It also gives you a reliable body to trade into for extra lifesteal healing. There's stuff like the Protoss Rush minion that goes down to 0, the Divine Shield guy. It's called like Void Ray or something. I don't even know. You know, that's kind of nice because you get like a 2-for-1 on the Divine Shield, protects you from that first random attack, and it can cost 0, so you could really play it for 7. If you're forced to play other more expensive minions alongside this, you know, you're adding this overhead that delays it a little bit too much, I think. Like, if you know, you got to play a 2-drop with this, you're pushing to turn 9. That might be too late for this kind of stabilization. There's a tight window sometimes where you have to find that healing at the right moment. So like even a Catch of the Day pushing this to turn 8, like, is that going to be an issue? There are ways around that. You can have like the weapon summon your 1-drop or whatever, you know. There's ways to make this work. The question just becomes for me then, like, deck fit. I think this offers a really interesting swing opportunity. It does do a lot. It's very high impact. But what deck is running it? That's where I'm getting a little bit lost on this, right? Does this go into a control deck? Do they need this? Do they have the minion package to support this well? It doesn't seem like it goes in a Protoss Priest deck to me necessarily. Those are much faster. They kind of win before they need this sort of thing. It can be a lethal threat because it can like push face with these stats sometimes, especially with all those like little reborns left behind and everything. And the cheap minions are nice. So maybe, but it just feels expensive for that package. So in other words, I do like a lot about this card. I think some people could sleep on this being a 7-mana card and kind of write it off. I think it does something pretty cool. I'm just not sure who exactly wants to use it. And will that context fit problem hold this one back a little bit too much? All right, next up here is the Atlasaurus, a new 8-mana 5/10 beast for Priest with Taunt and Death Rattle. Summon a random Taunt minion that costs 5 or more. So big old fat Taunt that summons you, presumably another big old fat Taunt, like a big defensive wall of stuff here. Which, you know, it's slow, it's late, you know, it's unreliable on what you're going to get. I mean, it's the filtering here is nice because at least 5 costs or higher, so it's usually going to be a pretty impactful taunt. But still, you never really know exactly what you're going to get. And, you know, these cards usually are just too slow. Like, let's be honest, right? It's just hard to play these kind of cards, usually too slow. But there are sometimes those kind of big decks that, like, cheat out big stuff and have some way to, you know, get this going early. This is right in that threshold where it might just be big enough and defensive enough that any big deck that can cheat this out early could maybe find a home for this. I think it's fairly unlikely. I don't think it's common. I don't think that's typically the model we see in Hearthstone these days, but it's one of those I don't want to write off completely because it is just a big wall. And if this somehow got cheated into play on turn 4, even turn 5, that does feel like the sort of thing that could really lock out a game, because your opponent just doesn't want to push through, you know, 10, 15, 20 health, basically, sometimes off the back of these multiple taunts. Then there are also those Death Rattle synergies that could hook into that. You know, suddenly Umbra comes back, and you got even more walls of taunts. There's something there. I would have more faith in that in a deck like Druid that could maybe ramp to this more reliably and has historically had more ways to cheat out that big stuff than a class like Priest. But you don't want to write it off completely because of that. I will say for both this card and our previous card, another angle for both of these that's important is that them existing is actually really relevant off of your imbue hero powers. Even if you're not running these in your deck, which is what our star reviews are based off of, right? Cards have to be played in decks to be considered good. But they may not get run in decks necessarily, but they are both very interesting results from a heavily discounted imbue hero power. If you're playing these for like 1 or 2 mana or something, or 0 even, off your imbue hero power, insane results to have in the pool. Just really, really good, high quality things that maybe you didn't make space for in your deck, but are just incredibly impactful. So in a weird way, even if you don't play these, even if they aren't necessarily good cards at the level of putting them in your deck, they might be a significant buff to something like an Imbue Priest, who suddenly just has a lot more great targets in the pool and is happy to play these Atlasauruses. Now, I want to say something about this Atlasaurus that is not related to its power level. This thing looks epic and sick, and it's like this crazy, awesome, ornamental dinosaur that's like so cool. Why wasn't this what the cool legendary from the egg looked like, man? I want that egg thing that I'm spending 5 turns to pop out to look awesome and epic. Instead, it's just like a regular looking dinosaur, I thought. And this guy looks so cool. Now, I mean, admittedly, you know, if it just popped out of an egg, it wouldn't be decorated with all these adornments and stuff. So I kind of get that. But just this looks so regal and awesome. I do think this is probably just the mount from World of Warcraft, though. I seem to remember there being a big mount, like Brontosaurus mount. I know they're not called Brontosauruses here, but Mount Brontosaurus. Wow. That's a Brutosaur, though, not an Atlasaur, but it does look kind of similar. I don't know. Anyway, just a secondary thought. So this card's actually kind of okay, I think, anyway, is my takeaway. Moving on here to Mage, we have the Techiesaurus. This is a 7 mana 3/6 with Taunt. It's a mech and beast, and I heard somebody say that this is the first ever Taunt minion available in Mage, which is crazy to think about. Like, historically, in 11 years or whatever, we've never had a Mage Taunt minion. Like, I almost can't believe that. But also, why is this guy the guy to break that record? Yeah, there's never been an actual minion with Taunt. There's a few cards that reference Taunt and summon Taunts, but no actual minion in 11 years for Mage has ever had Taunt until this guy. He doesn't really look like a card that should have Taunt necessarily. But okay, sure, whatever. Anyway, he costs 1 less for each card you played this game that didn't start in your deck. So of course, if you're doing things like discovering a bunch of cards in Quest Mage, then you can discount this guy a bunch and get essentially a free 3/6 Taunt. Now, I almost know what happened with this card. I can just feel it. They printed this without Taunt, and they were like, dude, it's just not good enough. Like, this is not, like, playing a 3/6 just doesn't do anything. It's taking too long to get there. Let's give it Taunt and see if that helps. You know, maybe that'll make the difference. I unfortunately still don't think it's going to actually make the difference. 7 mana is a lot of discount to work with because, you know, this is kind of a 2-step discount process, right? It's not every time you're discovering a card. You not only have to discover the thing, you also have to play it. So, you know, this is like an extra layer that, you know, you got a lot of mana sometimes put into that. And it's not like your quest reward weapon is helping you. Those aren't counting as played because it's you played, not a card that your weapon played. So it's not like the weapon hitting 2 things is going to advance this by 2. You have to actually play the card yourself. So from a Quest Mage standpoint, I just don't feel like they'll make room for this. I think it would hit too late. Like, I mean, we're talking maybe like turn 7 or 8 that you're playing this at a reasonable cost. I'm not even sure it would be 0 at that point by often because you're often still just playing your own things to actually discover. So it's like, even though this is kind of a Quest Mage card, you're spending all your time discovering. You're not spending your time playing that stuff. And like, yes, you can discover discovers and there's like loops there, but it's not going to get you down to 0 fast enough. And I think you want to play this for 0. I think even playing this for 1 or 2 probably feels okay, but it's not a reason to really run the card. So that's interesting. I mean, there are obviously other ways to play cards that didn't start in your deck. It's not simply just Quest Mage. You know, I haven't thought this through, but I literally just pulled up the first card in Mage is Flame Geyser, right? Okay, the 1/2 Elemental didn't start in my deck, right? So like, there are other little ways that are really cheap to increment this guy. Maybe there's some other shell for this, but ultimately I think 7's just pretty expensive for this sort of card. I think starting this a lot lower would have helped because I don't think a 3/6 Taunt feels so oppressive or scary that it needs to have a really prohibitive cost. You know, this could have maybe been 5 and still felt okay as a card to kind of weave in for free for a deck that needs a little help, particularly with Quest Mage. I think it'd be tough. So ultimately, I don't know. Interesting flavor choice here with the Taunt thing. Like, what about this guy reads Taunt to you? I guess he's kind of a defensive looking dinosaur. Maybe his tail is capturing your attention for some reason. I don't know. But yeah, I'm not convinced it's actually very good. All right, next up here is Sheep Mask. This is a 4 mana spell. It's It's going to set a minion stats to 1/1 and give it death rattle, deal 2 damage to all minions. So this could be a way to kind of tidy up a board of your opponents. If they got like one big thing and a lot of little things, you know, you can debuff the big thing down to 1/1 and then ping it. It's 6 mana, clear at that stage to wipe up the big guy that is now a little guy and maybe some little leftover guys as well. Not all that excited about that as a 6 mana play. I mean, you know, the debuff here might just be worth it in some cases against like big starships and stuff if they just have crazy stats. Maybe sometimes that debuff is good enough. I do wish it was just a straight up polymorph though. The fact that it doesn't transform, man, there's a lot of crazy effects that you need to transform away. You know, you kind of need a hex. So I actually do wish that this card was both a little bit cheaper. Like I'd almost sacrifice this death rattle to make this thing cheaper and more flexible as a single target removal, because I just don't know how many board shapes are going to line up where both sides of this feel cohesive and feel worth it, particularly if you're adding in that ping tax. You know, sometimes you can just debuff and like wait to deal with it later, so they can't like develop a board into the 1/1 that's just lingering and then you like ping it next turn. Maybe that makes it feel a little better, but still kind of seems expensive. This is also a risky card to be in the pool for Mage because it doesn't say enemy minions. So like this could debuff your own stuff in like a Quest Mage deck where this gets auto cast, which I think is a notable downside. So next up here is Tribute Dance. This card's text broke my brain a little bit at first, but it's really not that complicated. It's a 5 mana spell. You choose a minion, and then you choose a different minion to transform it into, which importantly is not a swap. They aren't swapping. This is not bi-directional. It's just one direction. So for instance, if your opponent has a giant starship out there that's super scary, you could play down a wisp. You could choose their starship and then choose your wisp, and the starship will transform into a wisp. So basically it would be kind of a polymorph style effect in that case that's, you know, debuffing your opponent's starship. Alternatively, you could actually turn your wisp into their starship, which sometimes might be preferable. You know, if they just have an insane starship that's not killing you right away or something. Now, they'd still have their starship, so you'd be butting starship heads or whatever, but you could see some scenarios where that's worth it. You know, if you don't have your own minion, it might be a little harder. If they only have a starship, this could just sit dead in hand. Like you don't have a cheap enough thing to deal with it or whatever, or a cheap minion to play out. If they don't have another minion on board, as soon as they had another small thing, you know, then you could use it. It could get kind of stuck and could be kind of awkward. There's also just a lot of scenarios where they don't have anything that's worth transforming into. So I could see this sitting dead in your hand for a really long time, where you just have turns where you just 5-6 turns in a row where this does nothing. That's going to make this really hard to run. So one of those cards, like situationally, could maybe be useful off discovers, maybe some really extreme metas where this could be worth it, but I think a lot of the times this is going to just feel clunky and awkward and too situational to actually be something you run a lot. All right, moving on over to Demon Hunter here. We have the Horn of Feasting, a 4 mana spell that summons you 3 2/1 raptors with Rush, and then Outcast, give them immune while attacking this turn. So this is potentially a board swing tool. If this is outcasted, you get to deal 6 damage to your opponent's board. You also, of course, with 2 attack raptors, get to increment your quest in a quest Demon Hunter, and hopefully those stay behind via the immune outcast activation, and you still have some 2/1s left behind on board that again could help you activate your quest further. So this could be quite a few pops on your quest for 4 mana. I will say, you know, the outcast here does feel really important to me. Like I'm not, I think, very excited very often to just summon 3 2/1 raptors with Rush for 4 mana. When I compare that to like, I don't know, like the Elise location, you know, that also summons me 3 2/1 raptors. I like that a lot when that happens, but I'm getting so much more baked into that. Like, yes, of course I have to play Elise first, but I've got a location that's ticking for 3 different instances. You know, I'm usually spending 5 mana on that. It's also got another effect with it. Like, it's just doing so much more comparatively. Now, I'm not saying that this is a 1-to-1, but I'm just saying, generally speaking, like, I don't know if just Raptors alone holds up. I don't know how often the immune is hitting either, because this is kind of an expensive card for outcast and stuff, and it's like you won't always want to play this at the exact right moment that you top deck it. It might take a while sometimes for this to filter down to the left hand side of your hand. I will say, if you keep it in the mulligan and you have quest, that's already one card that's very reliably moved out of the left, and you may not have a lot of things stuck, and there's a lot of cheap cards perhaps in a 2's Demon Hunter. So Maybe it gets that left side by turn 4, but not always, right? You're not always going to have it in the mulligan or want to keep it in the mulligan. So I don't know, like this feels just a little light to me. I feel like they could have pushed this a bit more on cost, or maybe not even requiring the outcast. Would that have been too good? Perhaps. It's like, you know, is this the increment that Quest Demon Hunter needs to make that deck feel playable? I don't think this is the tool. I think it's not enough, and its fate is absolutely tied to that. This just does not get played, I think, ever outside of Quest Demon Hunter. I think you need that extra reason to run this for it to be worth it. So ultimately, if this isn't enough to push that to relevance, this card is also not going to push into relevance. It's kind of got to get there, if that makes sense, and I don't think it will. Next up is the Skittish Saucier, a 3-mana 4/2 with Battlecry. Reduce the cost of adjacent cards in your hand by 1. So that is 2 total cost discounts, assuming this is played from a middle position. That kind of makes this look like a 1-mana 4/2 with a bit of a delayed payoff there. It's like, you know, cost discounts are interesting always. You got to think about them. You got to consider cost discounts. But I think the fact that these cost discounts are split across multiple cards, and that this guy is just so susceptible on board as a 2 health target, like, man, that just dies to anything and everything these days, that it does actually feel like a pretty significant tempo sacrifice for 3. And then the cost discounts, I doubt they're rarely ever going to line up well enough to make it feel like it was worth this big swing. You know, typically when we look at cost discounts, we want to cheat something really big out really fast, because that can just make an enormous swing on board that can really help a game snowball from that point. A cost discount of 1 isn't typically going to do that. It isn't going to shift a power band down so much that you've created enormous opportunity out of it. It's just going to feel marginally better. And is this worth a marginally better result when you're taking a notably worse, perhaps turn 3 than you normally would? I don't think so, right? I just don't think it's going to be worth it. There might be some particularly cheesy things where some card goes down to 0, and then because it's 0, it opens up some opportunity. There's always options for that sort of thing, but I just don't know what it would be, and I don't know how well it would actually line up. You know, you could also like stack 2 of these, but then you got even more considerations on like positioning and stuff, and all just becomes a lot of work, I think, for maybe not quite enough payoff. So ultimately, this isn't terrible to me. You know, I think they're doing something here, but something about the shape of the minion, or just like the lining up of this effect, feels like it's going to be a problem. I think if this were a 3/4, I'd be more intrigued, right? Because I'd feel like I'm not making as much of a tempo sacrifice. But as it stands as a 4/2, I think the sacrifice here isn't worth the bonus. So next up is the Diabolus Rex, a 6-mana 6/5 demon beast with Kindred. Deal 6 damage to your opponent's left and rightmost minions, which, I mean, 6 damage is a lot. I think that will often clear a lot of things, even maybe going into turn 6. Although, I don't know. There's a lot of big stuff these days, to be honest. The question I guess I have for this card is just like, why? Why are you running this? Why do you need this kind of removal? Why do you want this Kindred limitation? Because obviously you have to hit Kindred to make this card even remotely interesting. Are you playing a demon hunter deck that cares a little bit about mid-game board removal? No, I don't think you ever are. I think this card definitely going to fall short. Kind of an interesting little thing, maybe sometimes off, like, I don't know, kill Jaden or whatever. Still at that stage of the game, though, maybe 6 damage isn't quite enough either. So ultimately, just not a useful card with any kind of home. All right, finally here we have some Death Knight cards. This is Soul Rest Ceremony, a 1-mana shadow spell. This gives your minions +1 attack and rush. They die at the end of the turn, which it's a couple intriguing things happening with this one, right? Number one, board buff. If you're just looking for an extra 5 damage, you got 5 things on board, you know, this could be a way to push for some extra damage and end the game, so you don't really care if they die at the end of the turn. Alternatively, you can use this as a way to stabilize a board, kind of like what we saw back in the day with Broomstick. I'm sure that card had another word in that title, but I don't know what it was. The Broomstick guy that gave your other minions rush. I will say with that one, you know, I think part of the upside was that would let you trade in with some big cheap stuff. I think we played that with like Giants and stuff, and then the Giants could trade in and then it'd be left behind. You'd basically be using it to value trade and make some big turns. This doesn't work that way because they are dying. So this is going to be stuff that you instead want to give rush that you want to die. So, Death Rattle minions, maybe some of the egg stuff we've seen. I don't really think this is a good enough enabler for the egg legendary we talked about yesterday, because that's 5 steps, and this is only, theoretically 1 step of the egg, 2 and 2 of these, but doesn't really feel like the chain of upsides that you'd want necessarily. But you could imagine other scenarios where it's like, okay, I've just got some little Death Rattle fodder. I'm going to throw it in, get to take some trades, activate my Death Rattles. I'm not mad that this card enabled me to stabilize a little bit. I will say, I don't think that's the most impactful thing always, and it's probably not something we really see much in this Hearthstone meta, but it's definitely a possibility, and it's only a 1 mana card. It doesn't have to be crazy for only 1 mana. As long as it finds that little moment here and there, that might be worth it for only a 1 mana card. And, the flexibility between having +1 attack and having this other enabler thing with the rush side of it could actually be pretty useful. There could even be scenarios where you don't even need the rush and you just want to activate your Death Rattles and kill stuff off. Maybe that's fine too. Maybe you just got some Death Rattles that deal like face damage or something, and this is a way to reliably kill off all your stuff and like blow up the opponent or something. So a handful of angles for this card do make it fairly promising. I think 3 different options for this. Some of those are going to find a home and find a reason to be played in a deck. So I think Soul Rest Ceremony here is pretty solid. Next up is the Story of Umbra, a 7 mana spell. Discover a Death Rattle minion that costs 5 or more, and then summon it and trigger its Death Rattle. So basically, you are getting a pretty big thing on board, and it's Discover as well. So it's going to be from Death Knight and neutral specifically. Here is the pool of Death Knight cards that are available. These are 5 or higher Death Knight Death Rattles. And yeah, I mean, you're getting to Discover, right? So, if you get offered something like a Stitch and Sow that you don't want because you're not getting its Battle Cry, like hopefully you can still find some good stuff. Harin's not actually in there. It doesn't have Death Rattle, just the keyword. Waken of Souls, amazing. Ninth Indra, kind of okay. This guy actually is pretty solid, I guess, because you are activating its Death Rattle immediately with a second line of text. So, you'd be getting an 8-drop and a 2/2 that summons you an 8-drop. That'd be a pretty big pile of stuff. Things like Stegadon conditionally could be pretty useful, actually. That might sometimes be really good. You're probably not pumped about Sourfang or Puppeteer, but those are the Death Knight cards. Now, keep in mind, it's also going to have neutral cards in the pool, too, which this is where things start to fall apart for me a little bit. Like, some of these aren't terrible, right? But I think there's gonna be situations where you get a Tormented Dreadwing and you get a Sourfang like we just saw, right? And maybe you even get like a Spore Gnasher sort of thing, right? Which Spore Gnasher, remember, this is kind of a cool Death Rattle in a way because it's a board clear when you play it, but here it wouldn't be because the spell, I think, is what's triggering the Death Rattle. I think the spell does not have poisonous. I don't think that would clear a board. Debatable. I'm curious what you guys think. But regardless, the point is that, Velen sucks, right? There are going to be scenarios where you get 3 things that kind of aren't that good. You're getting a body at a baseline, but the Death Rattles might not always be worth it, and you might have some really tough choices to make, basically, where there's not a home run hit. So with a lot of these, there's consistency issues. I would even go further than that to say, like, you just can't run a lot of 7-cost cards in any given Hearthstone deck. Even these greedier Death Knight decks that exist, this has got to compete against some pretty heavy hitters. You've got like Kill Jaden in that slot. How many 7-drops are you running? Do you make room for this? Is it worth it? Boy, I don't know. And then I look at like comparative cards in some ways. Like, I don't even know. I'm thinking about like Demon Hunter with their big Death Rattle package, right? Like their 7-cost Death Rattle guy, if you think about it in a similar way, right? Ferocious Fellbat. These cards are kind of similar if you squint, right? 7-cost cards that are all about like Death Rattles and triggering Death Rattles and stuff. And it's like, man, this one does so much more because, it's Death Rattles that you're building towards. It's consistent. Your deck is synergized around all of this, and therefore the output is crazy high. It is like a little more delayed technically, right? Because Umbra, you're getting both the body and a death rattle immediately, which, you know, could be a little faster, but it just doesn't do as much as something like Ferocious Fellbat. I mean, even comparing this to like the 3-cost spell for Return Policy, right? Even when you compare these two, like, you know, Return Policy is not giving you the body. Like, Umbra's giving you the death rattle. It's summoning it and triggering your death rattle, right? But you're spending 4 extra for a random death rattle, basically. And it's not activating a death rattle that you know is crazy synergistic. Again, like Return Policy, crazy synergistic. You know you're getting death rattles that drive your game plan as opposed to random stuff. So, like, look, of course I'm comparing across classes here, and that's not necessarily useful, but it is useful because it conveys the demands that a Hearthstone meta requires, right? Hearthstone requires hyper synergistic game plans, really efficient packages. They demand that you drive towards defined win conditions in a way, right? And the Demon Hunter Death Rattle cards, I see that. I don't see that here. This feels like kind of a random guy that's okay on board, will have some moments, but it's actually hard to make a cut in a deck list because of that. So, like, insane in Arena, right? Just in a vacuum, this card's pretty cool. In the context of a real deck, in the context of a meta, I do think this one falls a bit too short. I think it's going to be really hard to make space for this just because the results aren't consistent enough and don't necessarily always do what you need them to do for your deck. And then our final card here is the Hollow Direhorn. This is so sad, dude. This undead dinosaur here. 5 mana, 5/4 undead beast with rush. And after a friendly minion dies, you can spend 3 corpses to gain reborn. Or, well, you don't get a choice. It just happens if you have 3 corpses. So the idea here is, like, this guy's on board. You, like, hit your hero power or whatever, right? You trade in your hero power guy. That 1/1 dies. Because it has died, if you have 3 corpses, your Direhorn will gain reborn. You trade it in. He dies, hopefully. He comes back as a 5/1. Then if you had another minion on board, a leftover 1/1 or whatever, you could trade that in and give reborn to your Direhorn again as long as you had 3 corpses, and you could trade in again. So basically, if you have a lot of little stuff, little fodder to trade in, this guy could kind of be a board clear for 5 mana. It's a bit like the 3-drop dog thing that you give reborn with frost spells, but in this case, it's, you know, trading in tokens effectively instead. So, like, a sticky undead deck with lots of little guys could use this as a pretty big swing tool for only 5 mana. You know, even just getting 2 or 3 hits out of this starts to feel fairly efficient pretty quickly as you're trading this in. Do keep in mind, you know, like, you also have to trade in the little guys. They can't just, like, go face and do this. So, you know, it's all about this one turn where you're kind of sacrificing a lot of stuff, but it's not terrible. I do think, again, it's just a deck fit question, which it seems like a cop-out answer, but that's always the answer. Like, the way cards are designed these days and packages are designed these days, you can't just look at cards as a generally good thing anymore, right? You can't just say, hey, it has efficient numbers, it's going to get there, it's good. We have to look at context. We have to look at powerful decks for them. That's where this one gets a little shakier for me again, because we probably need, like, some really consistent undead swarm deck that's got a lot of little stuff out all the time, that's sticky, and you also need a meta that is, you know, demanding this kind of answer, that's got, like, you know, boards that play well into Hollow Direhorn trades with some, like, good mid-game boards full of 5 or 6 health stuff or something where a Direhorn actually lines up. Otherwise, you don't realize enough upside to actually run this. So, an efficient card, good numbers, good output here. It's just gotta find a home, which isn't impossible, just isn't super likely right now either. Bro, I forgot I got Druid cards to do still. I almost left these off the video. I already edited and uploaded a version. So I'm back with Long Neck Egg here. New 2 mana 0/2 Death Rattle summon a 1/2 beast and give your minions +1/+1, which I think this is actually maybe the best card we've seen so far. This is really, really good for any kind of token druid build. We've got quest druid. I actually think token druid could still maybe be better without running the quest. I don't know if giving up your turn 1 play, giving up that slot in hand, and kind of forcing yourself into an arbitrarily wide board plan. Like, yes, of course, tokens want to go wide, but they don't necessarily want to arbitrarily get to 7 all the time. That might force you down some bad paths, whereas a regular, just more aggressive token druid, they can play 1-drops, might be better. Either way, this card actually seems like a really nice piece of that puzzle, because if you have any other buffs, this gets buffs, starts trading in, gives you more buffs, and you can just really start stacking up those buffs on wide boards. If you do play this in a quest deck, of course, it's also just a nice body on board. Your opponent doesn't really want to clear necessarily. You do sometimes give them the ability to dictate when that death rattle goes off if you just leave this staggered out there, but I think could still create some awkward moments for them. And worst case scenario, it is still just two bodies bundled into one. So even that 1/2 beast left behind sometimes will matter. I believe it'll also always actually kind of just be a 2/3 beast, because it's going to summon first, and then that gives you even more stats on this. So ultimately, this card just plays really nice in Token Druid game plans and looks like a very powerful option for the class. So next up here is the Panther Mask, a 4-mana spell that sets a minion stats to 5/4 and gives it stealth, and then you get to draw 2 cards. So potentially a really big buff. You know, if you pop this on an egg, this is kind of like a 5/2 buff. If you got some eggs laying around, that could be nice. The stealth aspect, maybe not as useful for eggs. Stealth also sometimes does conflict with buffs. Like, you often want to use those buffed stats right away, you know, to push face or like trade them in or whatever. So, you know, the stealth might not feel like too much upside normally, but drawing 2 cards, of course, also a nice bonus for 4 mana. So this card's actually doing a lot. Anytime you expect to have something left behind on board, this does push a lot of stuff all at once. Like, you get some card draw to reload, but you're not necessarily sacrificing on board either, as long as you have some sticky minions. Anytime you have to play something alongside this on the same turn, it certainly feels a lot worse, because that 5/4 isn't necessarily as immediate. That's where the stealth would come in, of course, but still, you usually want these cards to have that impact right away. It might still be worth it to, like, you know, on turn 6, play both of these, have a 5/4 that can rush face, push face next turn, and still reload a little bit, but I'm less excited by that. I want something that has stuck on 3, and I play this on 4. There is another side of this too with that stealth. It is a permanent stealth. There might be some card or mechanic where if you give a card permanent stealth with like spell damage or whatever, you could like create some kind of crazy pop off or something, where this is actually kind of a combo enabler because of that stealth. Some decks don't necessarily have good ways to snipe something through stealth, and this could be a little bonus on this. I wouldn't say that's going to be the typical use case, but it's something I'd want to keep in mind and like keep an eye out for, because something could break that down the road for sure. And then for real, our final card here is the Seismopod, a 9-mana 9/9 beast for Druid. Taunt and Elusive and Death Rattle give all minions in your hand and deck +3/+3. So just a big old pile of stats on this when it dies. A big old annoying body. I mean, look, usually I would say this is way too slow. You know, 9 mana is just so outrageously expensive. This Death Rattle does take a long time to pay off, but like we kind of talked about with Priest a little bit, this is just big enough and annoying enough with Taunt and Elusive that you start to get a little intrigued by it. In particular, Druid, like I teased in that Priest card. If it was in Druid, I'd like it better. You know, this is not a turn 9 card. Sometimes this is a turn 6 card, a turn 7 card, maybe even earlier. It does feel like if you cheated this out on turn 5 or 6, which is possible, that Death Rattle starts feeding in a lot quicker. The stats make a bigger impact. You got resummon effects. Like, man, this could start to snowball like crazy with Hydration Station and stuff over the course of a game. Do those stats add up enough? Does Umbra give you more? I could almost see a deck cooking on that. It's going to be a really tight window for it, though, because, you know, for stats' sakes, they have to get really big right on time. Otherwise, it's too late for the stats to matter. And, you know, if that's happening even on like turn 8 or 9 instead of turn 6 or 7, that could be the difference. Your window might close basically for something like Seismopod. So I wouldn't totally count this one out. I think it's possibly just sticky enough on board and just enough upside on this Death Rattle that could start to chain into some pretty nasty stuff. Because I could see a Hydration Station bringing one of these back, Umbra popping off 2 or 3 of these, and at some point, you know, that you're playing 20 taunts or something reliably on turn, you know, even 10 maybe. It's like, geez, that might be enough to actually make this a threat. So I kind of don't hate Seismopod all that much. So all that said, let's go ahead and rate these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Fire Breath is a 4-star card. Chill Spine Stegodon is a 3-star card. Tor Totem is a 1-star card. Ritual of Life is a 4-star card. Behemoth Mask is a 3-star card. Atlasaurus is a 2-star card. Techiesaurus is a 2-star card. Sheep Mask is a 2-star card. Tribute Dance is a 2-star card. Horn of Feasting is a 2-star card. Skittish Saucier is a 2-star card. Diabolus Rex is a 1-star card. Soul Rest Ceremony is a 4-star card. Story of Umbra is a 3-star card. Hollow Direhorn is a 3-star card. Longneck Egg is a 4-star card. Panther Mask is a 3-star card. Seismopod is a 3-star card. And there you go, folks. You know, nothing crazy here, but a few solid, I think, 4-star cards, some actual playable stuff that makes sense to me. And the rest of this isn't quite as bad as yesterday. A few clunkers for sure, but some things that, like, even if you don't play them, I think them existing creates some cool moments, create some fun storylines. Randomly generating some of these cards will be interesting. So at the end of the day, a much better day than yesterday. Yesterday I was like, oh no, what is going on? I'm still not sure this is really going to disrupt the meta in a big way or anything, but some cards I can see angles for. I can cook some things up. I have some dreams for these cards and can see some fun with these decks. So share your thoughts on all these cards down below. Thanks much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.